Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Watercolor Fundamentals. And in this one, we're going to talk about palettes. I think it's an important thing to discuss. Otherwise, you can end up with way too many. It's important to be aware of kind of, how you work and what you're going to require from a palette, because there are a wide range of options out there. And we'll just kind of start here. And I have a whole bunch, from cheap plastic palettes to little portable tins, kind of a travel plastic version of like a Robertson palette, a pretty classic Holbein palette, what was a pretty strong workhorse for me for some time, but we'll start with this because I think that this is a very approachable entry point into getting a palette. And should you have one? Yes, absolutely. There are all sorts of things out there, like little butterfly dishes, flower petal dishes, and things like that, which you can't close them up. You can put a little bit of paint in it and you can work on it, and little flat trays and things like that. But for me, one of the huge benefits of watercolor is its portability. So this, we'll see how dry things are in here. This was one of my first little palettes, and it's perfectly great, very useful. It's got 5 little mixing areas in there and a range of paints. At this point, I was just shoving paint wherever. I wasn't really thinking about anything that I consider these days. It was kind of like, oh, I have an empty space, I'm going to put that there, which I'm sure is the route many people take. One thing I will recommend quite strongly when you get a plastic palette, and you can maybe see in here, I don't know if it really shows up or not, but these are really terrible. This is kind of, for me, the big downfall to a little plastic palette, is the beading that will happen in these little mixing areas. You just get these little balls of water and mixture that are really tough to manage, in my opinion. So one little tip is get a bit of steel wool, and then you just go in and abrase the insides of all these little mixing areas. And what'll happen is it just kind of breaks up the surface tension a little bit, and it's much more pleasant to mix in. So this is a really nice little palette. It's not terribly big, and one of the benefits again is you can close them up. I will say that one of the things that I'm not a big fan of, having used a range of this type of palette, is I don't really like the ones that are on the other side. I would prefer if all the colors were kind of on one side instead of mixing area on the other, because accidents do happen and these things do get wet, and I have had some experience with some paints that tend to stay wet a little bit longer, and then you close the palette up and into your bag it goes, and that whole one side runs over all your other colors. So I tend to like them all on one side, and then I will just endeavor to try to put that thing down flat in my bag. So yeah, so I used palettes like that for quite some time, and they're not very expensive. You can get a small little palette like that for less than $20. I think like 12, something like that, Canadian. The next palette that I ended up acquiring, because I'd used that little plastic palette for quite some time, was a palette that I'd seen. And you see this one's kind of, it's been stickered. I'd seen this palette used quite a bit by a number of people that I respected. It's the Holbein Holbein Studio 1000, I think. And this is also a really great palette. What I like is that it's metal. It's just kind of a really, this finish in here is really nice to mix on. I've got some very big mixing areas, so this was a really nice step up for me in going from the smaller palette that I had just shown. Just having more space. I was trying, well, and still do, like to paint fairly loose. I like lots of wash, so I need space to mix that wash. So big areas, I've got 3 kind of really big areas I can mix big washes, and then a nice little area here that I can spot mix. I did kind of enjoy the fact that I had this extra little bit here, which would be for, you know, putting your thumb in there, but a place that I can keep a sponge. And then lots of space for colors. This wasn't really something I used, more just kind of all my main colors are here. These were just kind of, you know, nice to tries. So there wasn't that much of an issue with these rolling over into the other paints when I closed the lid, because these weren't used very often. But this was a really nice palette to work with for some time. My main issue with it is, if you see here, all this bending, and there's some denting on the top. It's not the most robust palette in the world, and to be perfectly honest, I probably could have taken better care of it. But it's still a great palette, and I still will pull this out from time to time. But yeah, it's the Holbein Studio 1000. So, and they're not, for getting into a metal palette, a full size big palette, they're not terribly expensive. Like, you can find these things on sale for well less than $80. So considering what one can spend on some really expensive brass palettes, this is quite a reasonable entry point into that world. And these wells are really nice and big, so this works good for painting much bigger paintings. So it's a really great palette. Plus, as an extra bonus, it takes stickers very well. So from that palette, I ended up going into this one, which is, I want to say it's by Mijello, but it could also be Art Basics, one or the other. But this had quite a lot of options for putting the paint in, right? Lots of wells in here. There's 9 and 9, 18 and 6. So we have 24 places for pigment in here. And yeah, I really enjoyed working with this. Got 2 big mixing areas for kind of a warm wash and a cool wash, and a very large area that I can do spot mixing and things like that, and even mix up extra bigger washes. But this thing was really cool because this tray comes out, I can have an extra area to mix in if I wanted to, but yeah, it's very cleaning friendly, I guess is the word I would want to look for. And the other nice feature about it is this little blue line you see around here is just like a little gasket, and it meets up with this little raised edge here. So when you close it, it is relatively watertight. Meaning, if you're in a bit of a hurry, I will still kind of do what I can to try and keep this thing level. But if anything does tilt or whatever, I never had any accidents in the bag with this palette. So, but yeah, it's a really handy palette. And again, the price point on these ones is not too bad either. Usually you can find it for in between $20-$30, that kind of thing. But yeah, I use this one a lot. I really still like this palette, and often, if someone's looking for a recommendation, this is generally what I will suggest. I probably lay out the colors a little bit differently now, but we'll talk about that one in a moment. And then another palette, just a nice little, this was just a little watercolor tin that I had ordered, I think probably from maybe Jackson's Art Supplies or something like that. Just a small, I just wanted a small little travel box. This was, well, this is the original base underneath here that came with it, and I just pulled all the whatever you'd call it, the little holders. It had like 6 pans and 6 pans, it's basically 12. So I just pulled all those off and then have used sticky tack to stick all these half pans and full pans onto this with a range of the colors that I was using at the time. And this is great. It works really well. Fortunately, I have a son who has a 3D printer, and he made for me a little insert that just comes in and out. So I just kind of took this thing out and I just dropped that in, and it has essentially the same thing in there. So you can see a trend in here. You know, I like this lid. It's got 2 nice areas for mixing in it, and then a nice little flap on the other side that I can do little spot mixing. Has been a great palette for urban sketching and for traveling if I want to pack light, and probably will continue to do so. We'll see how that goes, because I now have another little thing that I'm going to try on a trip I'm going to go on soon. This is something that I've been kind of ogling for a bit, the art toolkit. This thing is like super tiny. It's not much bigger than a business card holder, and I'm pretty sure it's basically reclaimed business card holders. So I don't know, I've played around with it a little bit. I like it. It is very small. We'll see how it goes. I may regret this being the only thing I bring with me on a trip, but you know, if you're looking for something super tiny to put in, you know, a little carry bag or whatnot, I haven't seen it get much smaller or slimmer than this. So I'm going for a week. I am doing other things, so I don't know that I'm gonna run out of paint, but I might. So I will report back on that one. But it is, you know, just a really cute little palette. I'm probably gonna miss this, but I'm gonna give it a go. Another interesting palette. Actually, I do like this one. It packs up pretty small. Doesn't seem like much when you look at it like this. However, once you unfold this sucker, it's based off a Robertson palette. So like Craig Young, it's a very well-known palette maker for making the Robertson box. I probably am saying that wrong, but anyways, it's a great little palette as well. 16 pretty standard allotment of wells, but really big, deep wells for mixing in, and a couple little fly out things right in here for spot mixing color on there. So this is a really great palette, and if you notice, these things just go and they click right into place, and this whole thing really just seals right up. So this is a pretty awesome travel palette because of the fact that it does seal right up. Those first little flaps when they go down, this thing's great. I don't really worry about this palette so much when I chuck it in my bag. Yeah, it's fantastic. It's Shy Arts. They're out of the States. And then last but not least is, if you have seen any of my videos at this date, if you've seen all of them, you've probably seen this. This is the current palette that I have been working with. I love this palette. It's not exactly something that I'm going to shove in my bag and go, you know, travel with this, but this is a brass palette that I had made for me. I waited for a little while for it, but you can see some of the things that, you know, have come to be important to me, right? Having nice, big wells, having an area that I can spot mix color. And what I really liked about this, again here, now I have all my colors, right? All just on the same level. And then I liked the number of wells that I had in here. Slightly too many, I could probably get away with a couple less, but it's allowed me to really, as I've refined my use of color over the years, this has allowed me just to kind of orient all my colors chromatically. So all my split primary palette, which I'm gonna get to in another episode, my split primary palette and then intermediary colors in between them, all runs from my cool yellow to my coolest blue. And then I can put my earth tones in here, utility or convenience greens here, and then dark neutrals down in this area. And that's how I have my whole palette set up, just in that manner. So I know that, you know, any color next to it, next to the other color in the palette, is going to be as close as it can possibly get from the colors that I have, right? So if I want to mix something between this orange and this warm red, right, if I want it as bright as possible, I'm going to be using these two. And again, this is going to be something I will get into in another episode. But yeah, I really do love this palette. And again, big wells for mixing have become super important for me. A nice big area that I can spot mix colors is also very important for me. And as you saw back in the Holbein palette, I like to have access to a sponge because, you know, you have heard me talk about moisture control. That is something that I'm constantly after and trying to work on. So, you know, I have my little sponge right there, so I have no excuses not to try to get a little bit of moisture out of that brush. So yeah, there's a bunch of palettes and some thoughts on them. So hopefully this is of some benefit to everybody. There are no shortage of palettes out there. The main thing is, you know, if you don't have one and you're just getting started, this is a great place to start, right? Right here. This little one, it's not gonna cost you a lot of money. Again, as I mentioned, I would probably have arranged the colors a little bit more thoughtfully now, especially considering the way that I work. I would want these things more chromatically oriented, just because it's a bit easier for me in the way that I think now. But, you know, having a little palette is really handy, right? You just put your paint in there. I spray them down a little bit before I start working from a palette, you know, 5 minutes or so before, and that water will soak into the top layer of your pigment and make it much easier for you to get in there and get at that paint. And yeah, I've seen too many students come into the classes with these little flower petal palettes, and then they're trying to be very economical with the amount that they put in because they know they're just going to be cleaning the thing out at the end of class. With a palette that can close up and just go home and don't worry about it, right? You don't have to worry about that. You just put your paint in there, use what you need, close it up, and it'll be there the next time. And you don't have to waste any. Because that is another good thing about the watercolor medium, is a little bit of water and we can re-wet it and continue to use it. So thanks everybody. Thanks for watching another episode of Watercolor Fundamentals. And we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.